you look for the compliance supplement on whitehouse.gov, Section 3.2M tells the auditors how to audit you, which makes it really useful when they come in and they're asking sometimes for some egregious things. And you can go, well, wait a second, the compliance supplement doesn't really permit you to look at those sorts of things. It needs to be in line with this. So that is an excellent resource if you want to know what they're looking at when they're looking at you. Again, documenting exceptions and reasoning behind decisions. It doesn't mean that you can't ever deviate from the requirements, but it needs to be very clear why you did so, and should be such that a reasonable individual would come to a similar conclusion. Remember, those people that are looking at your audit or looking at your documentation, they're not experts in your field. They're coming from a third-party perspective. So while we all go, oh, well, you know, every research administrator would know that, these are not research administrators, and you save yourself a heck of a lot of time by trying to put yourself in their shoes and going, okay, if I'm somebody who doesn't know much about this and all I know is the federal regulation, how is this going to look? And Julie referenced this perfectly. Beware of leaving documentation and email alone. And
this is something I say in every training I've ever done, but it's very easy. I think especially, well, I don't want to make it sound that centrals aren't busy because everybody's busy, but I know at a department level, oftentimes you're doing, you know, your entire job is often not research administration. And so when you're working on 20 other problems that have absolutely nothing to do with sponsored research and you get one email answering a question, it's very difficult to remember to PDF that or print it or however you save things, but very crucial.
For those that don't know, when your single audit comes, they request a control narrative, which basically shows all the controls that you have in place and how they're mitigating the federal requirements. So you'll hear sometimes the word COSO, which is a infrastructure for managing internal controls. And uniform guidance recommends that institutions have a COSO framework in place. Not all of them are required to do so, but something in line with the COSO framework. So I don't want to get too far down this because it gets very technical. But that maps out what controls you have in place, what are the key or primary controls, and then any secondary controls you may have to mitigate along those lines. So when you have this control narrative, you want to make sure that they cover the compliance requirement, like, okay, the information that's in the header, how are you mitigating that? Well, we have pre-required fields within our template, and somebody or the contract officers have to verify this. That would be your primary control source or something along those lines. Do not put anything in there, though, that you are not consistently applying, because they do not just audit against your federal requirements. They audit against your institution's requirements as well, and they can have findings even if you're in compliance with the federal requirement if you are not complying with your institutional requirements that you provide to them. So what we tend to do is we have our very clear documented policies. We have a separate, what we consider an unauditable document that is a best practices document, which goes through the process, which goes through the sort of making a decision aspect of things. Those are not what you want to provide to the auditor, because those are the things that they are going to then use as gospel. And we want to make, and we put it in headlines, unauditable document, best practices, not a requirement, because it walks people through what they should do, but in cases where it's not consistently applied because there's some ambiguity, you want to make sure that you're not being audited against that. Single audit is really easy to prepare for because their requirements are very well mapped out. Your sponsor-specific audits are probably going to be much more in-depth into a specific area. They may also require you to pull that documentation from your subrecipient to show that you appropriately monitored and paid them. So that's why it's going to be important to make sure not just that the subrecipient retains their document, but that you retain the evidence that you have appropriately reviewed, certified, signed, paid, made sure it's in line with technical progress, all those different things, that you were a good steward of those funds when you were passing them through. So just something you want to be aware of. So somebody asked what COSO stands for. It is the Committee of sponsoring associations of the Treadway Commission. If you just look up COSO, you'll see there's a whole massive background on it. It's a pretty extensive framework that is used nationally for internal controls for institutions.